All right, if you got your Bibles, Deuteronomy, we've made it to the final book of the Torah, final book of what is considered by the Jewish people the five most important books, the most important section of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. We looked at chapters 1 through 3 briefly last week and just said basically what's happening in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means second law, and nomos is second law. So we have Deuteronomy, we have Moses giving the law again to a new generation of people. So the generation that wandered in the wilderness wandered until they died. That was the point of the wandering, in fact. So the faithless people who were finally and utterly faithless would die and could not enter the promised land. And now we have a new generation. What's up, Rachel? Hello. Welcome home. Home for the summer? Wonderful. That makes me so happy. We have a new generation of people who were not at Mount Sinai, at least not above 20 years old, not as adults, and who are now outside of Canaan, about to go into the land across the Jordan, and Moses is giving them the law again. And so we have him sort of rehashing where they have been, what they have done, what they have seen God do. The first 3 chapters is a summary of where they've been in various things, and Deuteronomy in a whole is that to some extent. But just as a reminder, normally, as you guys know, whenever I teach, I start with a joke. So Deuteronomy chapter 1, I don't actually, but verse 2 is the joke in Deuteronomy where, and I honestly think it's meant to be, like we said last week, I think it's meant to be humorous. Verse 2, as he's beginning to retell the story, he says, it's 11 days' journey from Horeb, that is from Sinai. It's an 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. To where you stand today, it's an 11-day journey. And then without saying anything else, verse 3 says, in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month. That's wonderful. That's incredible. It encompasses the entirety of the story of the Israelites to this point. It should have taken 11 days. Here we are 40 years later. That's how long it has taken us to cover 11 days. That is the capacity of man. That's what we're capable of. We can make an 11-day journey take 40 years. And we see it happen in our lives all the time. So that's what we have in the beginning of the book. Starts that way. Chapters 4 through 11 are really the next section. We could divide it a few ways, but we're going to do it this way. Chapters 4 through 11 is basically Moses saying, be better. They failed. Be better. As he's giving the law, continuing to give more of the law, he is telling them to be better than them in the ways that they are meant to be better. Moses is basically preaching sermons, is what it seems like to these people. The key things for the new generation to see and to remember. Look at chapter 4, starting in verse 1. Read some verses here. After Moses kind of gets done with the narrative retelling of the story. And now, O Israel, so new Israel, I speak to you, listen to the statutes and the rules that I am teaching you and do them, that you may live, and go in and take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor, for the Lord your God destroyed from among you all the men who followed the Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. See, I have taught you statutes and rules that the Lord God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Keep them and do them. That will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the people, who when they hear all these statutes will say, surely this great nation is wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon Him? What great nation is there that has statutes and rules so righteous as all this land that I set before you today? Verse 9, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and to your children's children. The retrospect Moses has given has made a few things clear, right? Not one of God's promises from Abraham onward has failed, even Adam's promises. Not one promise has failed. God has continued to be faithful. And He continues giving them the warnings as well, saying none of God's warnings failed. God warned if they were faithless, this would happen. They were faithless, this happened. God told them if they did this, they'd be blessed. They did that. When they did, they were blessed. But as we focused on Sunday, perfectly, even Israel, who has seen and heard and experienced such great blessings and such great warnings and seen God do both of them, even Israel is at danger of wandering away from the Lord. So we had that passage we focused on so deeply on Sunday, those words rather, verse 9, only take care. The same words the writer in Hebrews uses. The Greek version of those Hebrew words. Take care. Watch out. Beware that you don't forget. And the reader, right, we read this and we think, how in the world could they forget? But their parents forgot. And they didn't get to enter the promised land because of it. And they were the ones who saw it with their own eyes. Of course you and I can forget. And so we have this sort of reminder throughout Scripture to take care, beware. You guys tend to forget. You guys being you humans tend to forget. You tend to take your eyes off of God, either when things are too bad or when things are too good. We are very good at removing our eyes from God and putting them elsewhere. So take care. Watch out. Beware that you don't forget, that your heart doesn't drift. We are prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. All right, as we've been saying in the Hebrews, when we drop the oar and stop rowing, we don't drift to righteousness and selflessness and humility. We drift to selfishness and pride and sin. So take care. Now, in the chapter 4 and following, Moses has a few big emphases that won't be surprising to you. A few things that he emphasizes loudly. The first one is an emphasis on the word. An emphasis on the word. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2. You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you. Look at verse 9. Take care, keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things you have seen, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and children's children. Look at verse 13. He declared to you His covenant, which He commanded you to perform. That is the 10 Commandments. And He wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you the statutes and the rules, that you might do them in the land that you are going over to possess. One more. Look at chapter 8, verse 3, which will sound familiar to you. Chapter 8, verse 3 says, And He humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor does your fathers know, that He might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Jesus is quoting Moses there. That He fed you with manna in the wilderness. He gave you more food than you could eat, so that you may know man does not live by bread alone, that bread will not be enough. When you are hungry, you think all you need in life is bread, food. And then you eat, and now you have all kind of problems you remember. Isn't that funny? It gets lunchtime, and all you start thinking about is lunch. Like, I forget all the other problems I got. I need to eat. And then you eat, and you think, man, I've got a lot of problems. Right? You forget it. Who cares about food anymore? I've got all these things to deal with. The same sort of idea here, that God gave you bread to show you that your life is more than this. You need more than this. This is not enough. This is not sufficient. We talk about how often, and it seems like there's more and more every day. Russell Brand, bring the latest one if you know who he is. But more and more every day of these men who have what the world considered to be it all. Everything you could dream of. All the money, all the wealth, all the opposite sex love and affection, all the things, and they get to that point of having it all, and they realize that it's nothing. That this is not enough. Surely life is about more than this. And they were made that clear, that man does not live by bread alone, but on every word of the Lord, that you need the word of the Lord. And this is really, it's really a pretty revolutionary thing, the Israelites being a people of the word, in that we take it for granted that, well, of course, religions are based around books. That wasn't the case then, right? That was never the case. There weren't texts that were authoritative in the way that we talk about the Bible as authoritative in the ancient world. That there wasn't another Bible. There isn't for those ancient religions. It wasn't a word-based religion in the way that ours is. Right? They would write about the gods, and they have stories about the gods and narratives about things and how things came to be. But there wasn't this sort of God-breathed, God said this to us, and this is our authority. That was a new thing with Israel. And of course, one of the things that we hear about often in the Word is that what sets God apart from the other gods is that He is the God who speaks to us. He is the God who reveals Himself to us. Obviously, the other gods are not existent. They're mute. But He is the God that speaks. He is the God that reveals. And we talked about in Hebrews in the beginning that Christ is the final Word of God, the expression of God, the clearest, I should say, expression of God. So He is a God that's always centered around what He says, right? And so we have already Moses saying, remember the statutes I have told you, what was written down for you. Remember the things you have been taught in the Word. Teach those things to your children and to your children's children. It wasn't just stories. It was written Word, and the Word was the words of God Himself. So there was an emphasis on Moses on the Word, right? This new generation was directly connected to the older generation by the Word that they both received. They have received the same Word from God. Secondly, back to chapter 4.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I just think if you know.
It's really magnificent. We kind of lose it again because of how inculcated we've been with Christianity across our culture. But all of the ancient gods look like us, meaning when we get power, we tend to all do the same thing. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. We seek out the worship and the adoration of others and see ourselves as gods, as all those ancient kings did. And whether those other gods were nothing or were fallen angels, were demons, whatever they were, we see that same pattern throughout the gods. It's so funny, not funny, haha, but funny. When a modern person will say something like, "I just can never believe in hell because the God I believe in is a God of love." Like, where did you get that God from? Like, what God are we? There is no God ever that's been a God of love except for one. And so the God you're objecting to is the only God that you're basing your idea of God on. The idea that God is loving at His nature, which we're going to talk about in a second, is only Israelite Christian God. And like Amber's saying, just profoundly 180 degrees different than all the other gods that they knew of in the ancient world. Nothing like those gods. And that's one of the main things that He wants us to see with these sort of things, right? Our God is one that speaks to us and gives us those words which are authoritative in a way that those other gods did not. That's great. Secondly, and it's all kind of connected, is that He is invisible, or more accurately, probably non-material, but you get the idea. He is the invisible God. Chapter 4, verse 12. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. And He declared to you His covenant. That's really interesting. Why that phrase? That phrase isn't necessary to the story, but it is. It's one of the main points. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. Look at verse 19. Beware, lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Big line here. Things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. Things He's allotted to you. And you're going to turn and worship them. Thoughts on that? Why is it important that God is not a form that you can see? Why is it important that we don't just say, well, the sun's real powerful, that represents God? Why is that? Thoughts on that? Yeah, go ahead.
Faith.
Yeah, because it's inherently faithful to not see the thing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think those are great. C.S. Lewis makes the point, I forget the exact word he uses, but he says that basically that God's goal is to have a people committed to Him. And so the one thing that He can't do that would break that goal is to force belief, if you will. That is, well, why doesn't God just poke His head into earth and say, hey, I'm real, everybody follow me? Because that would ruin the whole goal. That the goal is not just blanket following, as if some slaves are desired, but the goal is eternal marriage. The goal is relationship. The goal is meaningful love.
I think we do that.
Yeah, and there's two good things there, and it's kind of tied into what Amber's saying too. That, number one, to think that you could look at God and just keep going, all chill, is to greatly reduce who God is, right? So you are denying God His godness, not treating God as God, not thinking that He is seeable, thinking that you could look at Him as a sinful person and be okay. Difficult for us is a God that we can't wrap our heads around, right? And there's only one God that's ever been like that. All the other gods throughout history, you can basically make sense of. You know kind of why they do things, how they work, where their ends are. You can make the form of them and understand them a bit, but there are things about our God, which is what we should expect if He's infinite and eternal, which are always going to be beyond us, which are going to stretch us, which are going to be difficult. It's what the philosophical word, of course, being that He is transcendent. He's above everything else here. Right? Any other gods in the world that have ever created, you could make little idols and represent them, and that was okay because they were gods of this world. They were part of this world. They were in this world. They were made up of things of the world. Our God is so supra, right? Is so above the natural that there's nothing in the world that would do any justice to what He is. And so to make any sort of image would be, again, to lower Him below the transcendent. I like that. Look again at verse 19. You guys that have been here for a bit will remember this. When you see the sun, moon, stars, you're drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the people under heaven. The things that God has allotted to you. You would serve those things. Right? There's a connection in what we've been in Hebrews where we want to serve the angels, even though the angels were here to minister to us. We want to serve the angels, even though the angels are the ones that we're going to judge one day, whatever that means, Paul. Right? We tend to worship things. And to go further back is the golden calf. You remember the oddness of that story? One of the odd things being that what Moses makes them do with it. Remember this? Moses makes them melt down the golden calf and eat it. Eat it. And it seems, though it's not explicit, it seems that the idea is that he was telling them to put the calf back where it belongs. That is what calves are literally underneath you for your nourishment, for you to eat and to be nourished. That's what God has created them for. They are not above you that you bow down to. They belong inside you, right? They belong under you. They belong as the thing that you are, that is serving you, not the thing you serve. And it seems the same idea here, right? That you're looking at the sun and worshiping it when it was made to make you warm. You're looking at the moon and worshiping it when God put it there for the sake of you, to light the night. You're looking at those things that God, and we have a tendency to do that, to take the image and say, well, that thing is cool, let's worship that thing, when so often that thing was that God Himself placed it below you and intended for you to have dominion over and to reign over. The things that were allotted to all people, even the sun and the moon and the stars. And so it's actually a big deal that we know God is not able to be seen, right? He's not visible. We can't make a statue that looks like our God. He transcends those things. He is above the visible. Yahweh is.
What about Jesus?
Great question. Yeah. What about Jesus? And this is why, by the way, there's been a lot of debate for a couple thousand years about if we should make images of Jesus. Right? There's still a big debate going on with that. The cross along with that. And the difference in Jesus, of course, is that he was Yahweh, that did not count equality with Yahweh thing to be grasped, but made Himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being made in likeness to human flesh, all that stuff. So He did have human flesh that was visible, right? That we sing in that Christmas song, which is wonderful. Veiled in flesh, the Godhead see. Hail incarnate deity. That Christ's deity was veiled by His flesh. And so there was, obviously Christ could be seen while He was on earth, and could be seen if He returns, and will be seen when He returns. So His humanity was seeable while His Yahweh was invisible.
Do you think that there should not be statues of Jesus?
I don't want to talk about that. No, my honest answer is I would like to study it more before I really came down on that. I don't know. I'm a little uncomfortable with it. I'm certainly uncomfortable with the ones we know don't look like what Jesus looked like, right? And so, maybe we can base it on the Shroud of Turin or something. Yeah, Doc.
So while you're studying about it, would that also include things like the old rugged cross, songs that we sing that, put that above?
Sure, yeah, I think we need to be careful of all that stuff, yeah. And obviously, we're using the cross there as metanomically, as a representative of the whole, as a representative of what happened. And so, but certainly we can do that. Like the medieval church was famous for having relics that they worshipped as God. And we talked about this at Shepherd's meeting on Sunday, actually, that it was said that there was enough splinters of the cross, which churches had across the Middle East at the time, that there was enough splinters of the cross to build Noah's Ark. there was way more wood that was ever on the cross, but churches would have it to have people come. So we've done that in the past, right? And this is part of the same warning here. We like to do that. We like to say, well, look, here's something now, and let's worship this thing. And we still do it. You got something, LT? Yeah. Yeah, it's no different, right? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's an issue. Yeah. Yeah, it's no different, and that's like just goodness, the consistency of mankind. The worship of the splinter of the cross 400 years ago is no different than the golden calf. It's the same thing. They weren't worshiping a calf god. They were worshiping Yahweh with the calf, and we do the same thing. And so there's this danger of removing glory from God by making him less than what he is, by making him visible. God is not here-y. He is there in the most profound sense. Okay, the third emphasis that we see is that he is the God, meaning the only God, the above all gods. Look at chapter 4, starting in verse 32. For ask now of the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of heaven to the other whether such a great thing as this has ever happened or was ever heard of. Did any people ever hear the voice of a God speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and still live? Has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation by trials, signs, wonders, war, by a mighty hand, an outstretched arm, great deeds of terror, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God, there is no other besides him. Out of heaven he let you hear his voice that he might discipline you. And on earth he let you see his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. Because he loved your fathers and chose their offspring after them and brought you out of Egypt with his own presence by his great power, driving out before you nations greater and mightier than yourselves to bring you in, to give you their land for an inheritance as it is this day. Know therefore today and lay it on your heart that the Lord your God is in heaven above and on the earth beneath. There is no other. Therefore you shall keep his statutes and commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, that you may prolong your days in the land that the Lord is giving you for all time. So we see intermingled there the reminder of God's power, also of God's grace, of his might and of his mercy to these people, that he has done all these great things for them and for them not to forget. Okay, anything? Chapter 5, quickly we get a retelling of the Ten Commandments, which we won't do. Some sermons also. Look at verse 23. We get a reminder of that transcendence again, that theme, the otherness of God. As soon as you heard the voice out of the midst of the darkness while the mountain was burning with fire, you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, Moses says. And you said, behold, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and his greatness. We've heard his voice out of the fire. This day we have seen God speak with man and man still live. Now therefore, why should we die? For this fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of the Lord anymore, we shall die. So they tell Moses, you go, you listen. We're reminded of the inability of these people even to hear the voice of God and continue existing. And so there's this veil, right, placed between God and us. Literally in the tabernacle and temple, there was this veil placed between the Holy of Holies where God's presence would hover over, and everything else that separated us from God. And that veil was not arbitrary, it was no little thing, it was necessary. We begged for the veil ourselves, saying, please separate us from that holy God. Please hide us. Even going on saying, hide us in the mountains, hide us in the rocks, hide us under the rocks from this God. Look at, keep a marker there, we'll be back there in just a second. Look at Revelation chapter 6. That language used a couple times in the New Testament, actually. Revelation 6. Verse 15. We're going to see a comparison of two groups of people. Group number one in verse 15. Then the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves among the rocks of the mountains. This is when Christ returns. Calling to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of Him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? Okay, so this group, Jesus uses the same language in Luke 23. This group calls to the mountain and rocks to fall on them so they don't see the face of God. Let us not see the face of God. Look at chapter 22, Revelation 22. Second group of people, also known as us. Revelation 22, verse 3. No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and His servants will worship Him. They will see His face, and His name will be on their foreheads, and night will be no more. They will need no light of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. One group, even at the thought of the face of God, calls for the mountains to fall on top of them. The other group allows God to write His name on their foreheads and then reigns alongside Him forevermore, and that is our destiny. Okay, a little bit more. Look back at Deuteronomy chapter 6 to what is, to modern Jews, probably the most important verse, certainly in Deuteronomy, maybe in the whole Torah. The most important part of the second law giving, or at least the center of it, is what's called the Shema. The Shema, a Jewish prayer which is still prayed daily, bringing these themes together. In chapter 6, this is the primary command of the law. This is the primary command. Chapter 6, verse 1. Joe, what's your heading say? Jordan, right there above chapter 6. The greatest commandment. Yep, mine too. Verse 1. Now, this is the commandment. And that's that article, it says the. This is the commandment. The statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may go do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all His statutes and commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, that you may multiply greatly as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's the Shema, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down. Verse 4 and 5 is the Shema. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Now that, of course, sounds familiar. The word Shema just means hear and obey. It means devotion to the Lord. Thoughts on there being a law, a command that says love. Why? Commanding love seems like an odd thing. Certainly something we wouldn't do modernly, to command love in that sort of way. It's, again, going back to comparing it to other ancient religions, all the other ones that we know of, in fact, all modern religions too. It's a very odd thing to bring love into the picture in the way the Christian God does. It's a very odd thing to have one of the commands to be to love God. Like Amber was saying a minute ago, that all the other ancient gods were just worried about the general word worship. We're just worried about bowing down. We're just worried about reigning. We're just worried about having the power over you. We're just worried about your submission. Love is incredibly novel. It's very new for this relationship between God and humans. Right? We don't see love between God and humans in this true way, right? An actual love way between God and humans in any of the ancient divine texts or any of the ancient texts about gods. This is a new thing, this idea of loving God.
What's the Greek form of this love?
The Greek, I'd have to look at what the Septuagint says, but the Hebrew doesn't have those,
It doesn't have
the same things, right? But I'd have to look. I can do that at the end. But the Septuagint, the Greek version of that, would have chosen one, which is probably the best one to choose. Okay, so here's what's beautiful and interesting. Love, as we know this now, on the side of Christ certainly, love is the motivation that makes law fruitful, right? Love is the motivation that makes law fruitful. Otherwise, if all you have is law, you just have, well, what can I get away with? And how much do I have to do to get in? Right? That's what law gets you. If it's just law, then our human response is, okay, well, can I get away with this and still fit in the law? Right? Is that covered by the law, or can I do that? How much can I bend the rules and not break it? And how many times do I have to do this to be under the law? Do I have to pray every day? Or can I just pray every once in a while? Do I have to tithe of my flowers in my garden as well? Or do I just tithe of these things? Can I get away with this stuff? Do I have to do these things? There's all these sort of questions that make sense in a world about law. Right? Can I lie once or twice? Can I lie in my head? Can I lie if it doesn't hurt anybody? Now, you may like those questions or not, but those questions make sense in a system of law, right? Can I get am I going to break the rule if I bend this way? I mean, I know God says do X, but if I do like kind of X, is that okay? Can I fit that in the law? Love is entirely different. Right? Asking those questions with love is at best absurd, at worst very offensive. Meaning, like, if I said, what's my job as a husband? You said, well, your job is to love your wife. And I said, well, can I cheat on her once? Like, can I still do that? Do I have to bring her stuff? Do I have to give her stuff? How much do I have to give her? Do I have to do every Valentine's Day? Do I got to do flowers? How many flowers? Can I do 11? Do I got to do 12? Like, how many? What is it? Right? There's these questions that make sense with law that don't make sense with love. Like the response of well, can I cheat on her once? You're like, you love your wife. Like, that's the response. Love your wife. That's what you're supposed to do. Do I bring her 11 flowers? Just love your wife. Love your wife. There's these questions that make sense in a system of law that don't make sense in a system that's based around a relationship. Just love her well. Whatever that means, whatever that looks like. So we have this difference between, again, which is very unique to Israel. And we'll get to how, these things aren't opposites, right, of course, but in a system of law, it's, well, what can I do? What can I get away with, right? Very, very teenage, oh goodness, youth minister for 10 years. How far is too far, right? Goodness gracious, the questions. With my girlfriend, how far is too far? Come on, man. That's the wrong question, right? And we all know that. It's very hard to explain that, but that question doesn't make sense. The illustration I used to use all the time was was how that's a question that children ask. That's a question that immature Christians who don't have a real relationship with the Lord, at least any sort of mature one, ask. The illustration I would use is like if Cohen went to Cam's house to spend the night at Cam's house, and Cohen went to Cam and said, Cam said, Cohen, go brush your teeth. And Cohen said, okay, how long do I brush my teeth for? And Cam says, all right, I'll get you a little timer, puts a little timer like we do, a little minute, 2-minute timer, whatever it is. And you get done then. Fine. Now, if Jerry, who's my 16-year-old, stays at Cam's house, goes to Cam's house, stays the night, and Jerry doesn't brush his teeth, and Cam says, Jerry, you going to brush your teeth? And Jerry goes, okay, how long do I brush my teeth for? Cam's going to say, how old are you? What does that mean? What do you mean? What do you mean how long you want a line? You want me to set a timer for you? How many times do you brush your teeth? Right? This is the same sort of distinction that the child asks questions like, well, how far is too far? Are we not beyond that by now? Have we not gotten to the place where you're not just trying to bend the rules as far as you can bend them and still be okay? Right? That's the distinction. With the law-based system, if there's no love, if there's no relationship, law is just, okay, but what's the line? What exactly counts as adultery? And this is what the Jews did, right? This is what Jesus is responding to. We can get all the way up to adultery as long as it's not this, or as long as we do these things, then it doesn't really hit that line of adultery. And Jesus says it's not about the line of adultery, it's about your heart that's lustful. It's not about the line of murder. Like you can hate somebody, you can be angry, you can set traps at their house and hope for the best, but you can't kill them yourself with a knife. It's not about don't hit the line. It's that you're angry at your brother to the point you don't want to kill him. Right? That's the distinction that we see with this central call that is love God. Right? If you don't know how any of the other laws work, just do that one, and the rest of them work themselves out. Right? Love God and love each other is the entirety of the law. All the rest of it is just trying to tell you how to do that. Love in itself is everything. So we have to fight against the immature desire to, what is the line and how far up against it can I get? Right? What is the line for me loving my wife? Do I have to? And just saying, I just want to love my wife. That is just different and better in every way. I just want to love God. That is different and better in every way. I just want clean teeth, right? Whatever it is, but that's the idea. So if we just have law, then we have, okay, here's your 1 minute timer. You got to go for 1 minute. 2 minutes, thank you. That's what I do. Whatever it is. Floss every night too. So that's okay. So this is the distinction. This is why the love being the central ethic of Christianity, which it is. This is why it being the central ethic changes everything. Because it goes from being a religion that says, okay, well, what exactly can I get away with, to a religion that says, I love God. Of course I want to please God. But I want to do things for my wife. It's a joy because I love her. I want to please God. It's a joy because I love Him. Okay, one more point and then we'll be done. Maybe not. Y'all have any thoughts? Questions, comments, statements? Any thoughts on all that stuff? That's great. That's great. And how many of us have done that with our parents, right? You go back and you think, man, those jerks were right. I didn't say jerks, Mom and Dad, of course. Yeah, that's great. That's very good.